Welcome to the next episode of the Austin Bar Association's Council of Firsts. I'm your host, Amanda Arriaga, Austin Bar President. This podcast is made possible by the Texas Bar Foundation. Today we talk to Ramey Ko, who has the distinction of being the first Asian American judge in Austin and Travis County when he was appointed to the municipal court in 2010. Judge Ko earned his BA in history from Yale and graduated with honors from the University of Chicago Law School. Prior to serving as an associate municipal judge, Judge Ko worked for Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid and the Texas Advocacy Project. Judge Ko served on President Obama's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, which advised the executive branch on how to better serve the AAPI community. He also previously served on the Austin Public Safety Commission, chaired the Commission on Immigrant Affairs, was a founding member of the Austin Asian Behavioral Health Network, and is a past chair of the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative. I am so pleased to have with us today Judge Ramey Ko. Judge Ko, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure.
Good. Thank you for being here. I want to start off by asking, what made you want to be a lawyer?
I think I was one of those kids who, growing up, there were a lot of different things that I said I wanted to do, but there was always this kind of sense of like, Ramey likes to argue and debate about things, and he's also very analytical, and folks kept telling me like, hey, you're going to be a lawyer. I bet you're going to be a lawyer someday. And of course, it was always something that like I considered, was always in the back of my head. But maybe it's one of those things where like when you're a kid and people tell you you're going to be something, like you get really resistant to the idea. And so for years, I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to be a novelist. I'm going to be a elementary school teacher. I really tried to kind of push back against that idea. But at the same time, like I was a high school debater. I was doing all the kinds of things that you kind of imagine people who might go on to law school might do. And so it wasn't until college, I think I really kind of started to think more seriously about the option. I knew pretty early on, I think as young as when I was 11, that I wanted to be in public service in some way, whether that would be something on a volunteer basis, helping out with nonprofits or volunteering for campaigns or things like that, or whether as an actual career. I knew that that's the space I wanted to be in. And so there were a lot of different things I kind of looked at how I might do that. And the more I kind of looked at the idea of public policy, and the more I thought about what are my strengths, what can I bring to the table, what are the things that would allow me to make a difference. And so I started thinking, there are skills that I have, and what are the things that I might be good at. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought public policy is, at the end of the day, a lot of it is law. A lot of it is what laws do we have, what laws do we write, what laws do we need to change, what laws do we not need. And so more and more I realized that having a good understanding of law would be very helpful for working in public policy or working in public service in some way. And so that's kind of where it all started.
So you go to law school in Chicago, and then you started off your career in DC. How did you get to Austin?
So so career in DC is always kind of funny to me because a lot of the work I did was more of a volunteer basis, I guess. And technically I was, a employee of the White House at one point, but I wasn't paid or anything. But so coming to Austin was not originally in the cards. I had thought I was going to move to DC right after law school. My first summer there, I interned for Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa on the Hill. My Sec 2L summer, I was in the State Department internship program. And of course, I was dating somebody. At that point, pretty long time girlfriend was living there. She had gone to Georgetown Law School, and she was working over there. And so I kind of just took it for granted that, hey, I like politics and public policy. DC, it's where my girlfriend is. It's a natural place to end up. Well, as so many major life decisions that we make are made, I had a breakup. And that forced me to really re-examine a lot of my decisions and choices. And I realized that for years, I hadn't really thought about what I really wanted to do and where I really wanted to go. I kind of had just made a decision fairly early on in this process that, that DC was where I was headed, and that was that. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I don't know if I'm that interested in going there anymore. And the more I thought about, Texas being where I grew up, I was born and raised in the Dallas area mostly. I said, there's a lot here that I kind of miss. I've been away for, at that point, about 8 years. And I said, there's also a lot here that needs to be done. And DC is full of people who all have very big passions and ideas and want to change things. And they have a lot of them, right? There are places in Texas, that don't have those that same sort of critical mass of folks who are all super, super focused on that one thing. And I also felt like this is where I grew up. And if I want to make a difference somewhere, shouldn't I try to contribute and give something back to where it came from? And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought, hey, why don't I look at moving back to Texas and seeing what kind of work I can do there? It didn't really get far beyond that until I started talking with one of my oldest friends, another Austin attorney here named Ramey Ko. Rick and I were both debaters in high school, different schools, but we became close friends as different schools often did. And, we stayed very close throughout the later years. And he had come to Austin for college, and he got very involved in the community here. And he was saying, hey, there's a great community here that you can come in, get plugged into. I think you'll thrive here. I think you'll really love it. And, and I'll be here to help, smooth your transition in and introduce you around. And the more I thought about it, the more it's attractive it sounded to me. Austin was something that I think anybody who grows up in Texas thinks about Austin as this really amazing, cool place, right? Like, it was definitely a quieter place and a smaller place when I grew up, but it was still known, even when I was really little, that as this funky kind of hip place with a lot of creativity, a lot of life, just a lot going on. And to me, it seemed like the perfect mix, right? I would get to be in Texas. I'd be in the capital, close to where a lot of action is. But at the same time, I would be in a community that I knew was very diverse, that a community that I knew would fit well with sort of my values and the things that I wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough, also through Rick, to get connected with Fred Fuchs over at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, who heads up the housing group over there. And I'd done a housing law clinic in law school, and that kind of really piqued my interest and curiosity for legal services and direct services. And I got in touch with him, and he said, yeah, we're happy to sponsor you for a public interest fellowship. And I was fortunate enough to get an Equal Justice Works fellowship, and I came to Austin in September of 2006. Started a fellowship at Legal Aid working on housing, the intersection of housing and domestic violence law. And I guess the rest is history.
So DC's loss is Austin's gain. You get here in 2006, and then 4 years later, you make history as the first Asian American judge in Austin and Travis County when you were appointed to the municipal court. How was that celebrated?
It was definitely, I think, within the Asian American community, something that was very much noticed. I had, one of the things I did as soon as I moved here was to, really dive into the Asian American community and what was going on here. As a lot of folks know, the Asian community in Austin has just exploded in the last couple decades. When I first moved here in 2006, it was starting, but it hadn't. It was still sort of at the beginning of that explosion, but it was definitely starting, and people were noticing. And so I really got involved as much as I could, got to know a lot of folks, go to all the events, really kind of try to connect, and also to try to do some of my own organizing in the community and seeing what I could do to help build infrastructure and build resources and capacity out there. And so I was a pretty known quantity, I think, at that point within the Austin Asian American community. So there were some local Asian language newspapers that covered the appointment. There was an interview I think I did for, I believe, World Journal, which is a Chinese language daily in the U.S. And actually, because I'm from the Dallas area and I have a godfather there who's a very active person in the Taiwanese community up there, who's also one of my biggest cheerleaders. And so every time something like happened here or got accomplishment or something, in Austin, he'd always make sure that the Dallas Chinese language papers would cover it and talk about it and stuff. And so there was some coverage there as well, I think. But, to be perfectly honest, there wasn't like a huge, celebration or no parades or anything like that. I mean, I personally was very proud of the fact that I could call myself the first Asian judge in Austin and Travis County and blaze that trail. On the other hand, I also, realized that, there's a lot of other people doing the things that I'm doing, and, that it's there's a lot of firsts out there.
There's a lot of firsts out there, but one reason we have this podcast is to remind people of the history, because you aren't currently today a sitting judge. But if someone is not calling you Judge Ko every day, they're missing out. I think they're missing out on this story. And so I'm happy that we have a reason to remind everybody, and maybe it'll get in the papers again. I let you know that I found out about you through Wikipedia, so you're at least Wikipedia famous.
That's funny to me, and I actually went and looked it up after you mentioned that to me the other day, and so there I was. What I can say though is that celebrations aside, I found that my perspective and background really was very important to the job. Municipal judges, in Austin handle Class C misdemeanors. So you're talking primarily traffic offenses, but also your public intoxications and shoplifting and such, ticketable offenses. But we also serve as criminal magistrates for Travis County and work down there in central booking. And being a substitute judge, which is what my position was, I found myself there a lot. And while the, number of Asian Americans who go through the jail has not been a high number, that number has been increasing. And we'll see it continue to increase as the population explodes. And it was definitely something that we saw at the jail when I was there. And there were so many occasions at the jail and also at the court where there were people who were clearly very bewildered by the system. They may have linguistic limitations, but even if the language, capabilities were okay, there was so much about the process that was alien and frightening and mysterious to them. And, a lot of these folks didn't come from a background where they would have been able to sort of learn about how the system works or had some kind of concept of it. And, in some cases, folks were coming from backgrounds where the criminal justice system is a very scary place to be, is a place where bad things happen to people, right? And so, you just think about, for example, we have a large Burmese refugee community here in Austin. So, for those folks, the idea of being involved with the authorities in any way is a very, very scary prospect. And so I found that being Asian American, I was able to provide a level of, I think, assurance to folks that, hey, this is a process that is going to, we're going to try our best to make sure that things are fair, that you're informed and you're notified, that this isn't going to be like the experiences that you may think of in your mind, that, that there is a real system here that's designed to try to treat everyone fairly and equally. But of course, I realized that to do that, you needed to have people like me there, right? And so when there aren't people like me sitting in the room with these defendants, with attorneys, things like that, to help people understand and help bridge a lot of these gaps in culture and language, then we are treating people fairly and equally. And so I guess to me, that has always been like, more than any kind of recognition or celebration, like that was the thing that I took away from my experience as the thing that made me the happiest, right? Is to actually look back and say, you know what? I can point to specific situations where it was a situation where, because I happened to be the one sitting in that chair on that night, things were very different for this person, and things could have gone very, very badly for them when they didn't need to.
Mm-hmm. So since you've been in Austin throughout your career, you've given back to the Asian American community. And you specifically have been active in the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative, and you served on their board for over 11 years. Why is that organization so important to you?
So it's a very sort of weird history and journey, but it was one of the sort of most interesting experiences of my life. So if a lot of folks are familiar with the Asian American Resource Center, which is a city facility. It's a Parks and Recreation facility. It's a fantastic place. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. It's one of the city's best facilities. It's, I believe, the most utilized of the facilities of its type. People do events there. There are classes. There are all sorts of fun festivals. There are resources. It's just really an amazing kind of building. So, and we're fairly unique in Texas for having a city-owned Asian American center. And so that all started with an effort that came out of the community, the Asian American community. There was a grassroots effort formed to advocate and to raise money and everything to get this done. And they created a nonprofit back in 2006, I think, called the Asian American Resource Center nonprofit. So very self-explanatory name. They were there to get that done. Well, they were successful. They got a bond passed. The phase one was completed in 2000, I think around 2010, and the place was open and operating by 2011. So at that point, a lot of the original board members, I joined the board back in 2010, I believe, 2010 or 2011. And at that point, that was when things were starting to transition. The center was built and had opened its doors. A lot of the members who had been on there for the last 4 or 5 years, they left. They saw that their job was done and they deserved a break. And they definitely did. And so there was a bit of an identity crisis, right? What do we do now? And so for a couple of years, what we sort of did was this idea of, well, let's support programming at the center, and let's try to support programming that addresses unmet needs of the community. So one of the first things we did was work with the center to establish a senior lunch program. Right? There's a senior lunch programs that have existed, for a long time, but if you go to these lunch programs, for most of the time, you're not going to find food that's culturally appropriate for a lot of Asian seniors. You're not going to find food that's necessarily appropriate for their religious needs. If you're Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, there's lots of different dietary restrictions there. And of course, if you're older, there's different things you can and can't eat. But on top of that, and there's been the research done on this, right? People won't eat food that they don't consider good and that they find unfamiliar or too out of their sort of comfort zones. So this is a program that was long needed. There was a lot of demand. We had heard a lot of demand for it. We set it up, and it's been going ever since, and it's been great. But, I think it became obvious after a couple of years that without some kind of more definite mission, that it was very easy to kind of flounder and not really know what direction you were going. And admittedly, things got kind of bad for a while. At one point, we lost every board member except for me and one other person. Our executive director, our second one, I believe, she left for another position. And the only person we had left on staff was a program director manager that had just been hired. And she was young, brand new to the organization. And we were all kind of like, what are we going to do now? So thanks to some really great people at the city and some really great people in the community who kind of came out and helped and sort of pitched in, we did a few things. One is I convinced Haley Easley, who's the current executive director, to stay. I said, hey, I know you came on board expecting to be working under somebody. I know you never expected to be thrown in your, I think at the time she was probably in her mid-20s, to run an organization. And it took a lot of convincing, I think, at first, because I think she was understandably very, the prospect was very kind of scary. It's like, not only do I not have experience in this, but this organization seems like it's, not a great place. But we stuck it out. And we worked, and we had gotten, just before Haley came on board, a grant to do a pilot program to provide community health navigators. And this was basically people who are culturally and linguistically competent from the communities that they serve, who would go out and provide casework services and basically help people navigate any aspect of the healthcare system they needed help with. And Haley had been hired originally to help manage that program. So now we're like, well, you're going to run the organization and you're going to have this pilot program. And so we did some soul searching. We said, you know what? We want to try to be all things to all people. We wish we could do all sorts of social services for Asian Americans, all sorts of direct services, but we just can't. So we need to make a choice. And so I proposed, and I think our folks agreed that we should take that pilot program as our mission, i.e. there's a need for community health services. Let's do that. And it wasn't super easy to transition. There was definitely a lot of hiccups and a lot of sort of argument and things, didn't look like necessarily that we would make it. But at this point, 5, 6, 7 years later, after that sort of low point, we have a fully functioning board. I actually was able to retire from the board, and Haley has developed into an amazing executive director. We went from sort of 3 part-time navigators to, I believe we now have, I keep saying we, I'm no longer part of the organization, but obviously identify with them a lot. I think there's 6 or 7 full-time navigators. We cover Burmese, 2 different Burmese languages, Nepalese, Mandarin Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Arabic, I believe. And I think we may have actually lost our Mandarin Chinese navigator recently, but so if you're looking for a position, you have the skill set, check it out. But yeah, we're looking to continue to expand, and in the last few years, they've served hundreds of families. There's been amazing stories. A woman who was 100% denied any coverage of cancer treatment by her insurance, and through the advocacy of the community health navigator, they 100% covered it. And we did vaccination clinics. I think Achi alone was responsible for vaccinating a huge number of Asian seniors over the course of the COVID pandemic. So it's really, if people ask me what I'm most proud of in terms of like my career, my life, and things like that, actually hadn't thought about this for a while, but now that I think about it, I think it's no contest. I think, all the work that I did and the people I got to work with and being a part of this team that, gave rise to what we have now in an organization like this is more impactful than anything else maybe I've ever done. So,
how can our audience support this very important organization?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So Achi has a great website. Achi, it's AACHI. And I'm being a bad promoter now. I think it's AACHI.org, but it might be CHITX.org.
We will put the website in the podcast notes so that you can click directly on it.
Thank you very much. And they do have so you can go there to learn more about their programming. You can donate. You can volunteer. There's all sorts. You can apply for a job. there's all sorts of ways to help. And right now for May API Heritage Month, they're doing a special promotion where they have a Asian restaurant passport. It's, I believe, $50, and it contains over $300 in savings from dozens of area Asian restaurants. It's a great way to give and to also enjoy some great food. And it really is like a passport. The different restaurants can give you a stamp in your passport for when you visit. And if you're the first person to turn in a fully stamped passport, there's a big prize.
So we're going to support AACHI,
yes,
and everyone will get an Asian restaurant passport.
Absolutely. I really hope so. But yeah, so I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk a little bit about their work. With Asian community organizations, it's one of the biggest things that's hard sometimes is visibility, right? Just when people learn about what we do, they're always very impressed. But it's just getting that word out and letting people realize like, oh, hey, this organization exists and this need exists.
So we know that there's representation within the Asian community organizations. How do we get more representation of Asian Americans in legal leadership positions?
I think that's a very important question, because when you look at the data out there, right, Asian Americans comprise a pretty statistically significant proportion of law students and law graduates, and also of young lawyers. But like you see with a lot of, people of color in a lot of professions, the higher up you go, right, the more people start to drop out. And so when it comes to partner positions, GC offices, things like that, the representation is very, very poor. And when you talk to a lot of these folks who sort of were maybe on these pathways and then left, most of the time, I don't want to say most of the time, but I know a lot of the time, they'll tell you that it was a voluntary choice, and it was a choice because they just felt like they could not continue to function within the parameters that they were expected to function in. And also that sometimes the cultural barriers, that existed started to feel really insurmountable. And that's a little bit of something that I understand growing up, is that, since my parents are not from this country, and they, growing up, they're like a lot of immigrants, they spent a lot of their time working and didn't have much other time. There wasn't, a familiarity with all the sort of the soft power institutions that exist, right? And in a business and in a field like law, where it is such a personal, because it's, law at the end of the day it's people, right? It's people talking, problem solving, working together, trying to get things done. It's very much dependent on those interpersonal skills and communication. And when you're growing up as a child of immigrants, you don't know about the clubs that people go to, that they belong to, that you don't know about the places that the places to go to schmooze. You don't know about how to network. These are alien concepts for a lot of folks. And so, I didn't have that benefit, right? And so I remember I first really acutely felt that when I went to college at Yale, because of course Yale has a lot of people who are from worlds where they're very familiar with those types of institutions and that culture. And I really realized that's a big part of it. So I think to increase the visibility and the participation of Asian Americans in leadership, in particular in law, there has to be a sort of real commitment to diversity that's beyond just numbers or sort of very surface kinds of thoughts. Sometimes, there are folks in the Asian American community in law who I've talked to, and they said, well, there were things that I wanted to do for my community, for example. There were things that I wanted to do because of my cultural values and my background, that there just doesn't seem to be space for me to do that in the world. If I want to make partner, if I want to become the bar president, I have to spend my time in spaces that aren't where my community is. I have to spend my time in building capital and credit and things like that with people that aren't necessarily attuned to the things that my community is concerned about. And if I can't serve that need and provide that voice as a leader, then why am I bothering for those leadership positions, right? Why am I contorting myself and investing all this time and energy to get elected, say, president of a local bar association, when I know that space is a space none of my community goes to, right? And feels welcome at, right? So obviously there's so much you can say on this topic, but I think that's a big part of it.
Well, and that's why, while I appreciate so much your humility, right? I found you, I asked you if you would do this podcast. It's important to remind everybody that you were here and that you were the first. Because I love what you say, we need to go beyond surface thoughts. We actually do. We need to not just celebrate the people that are always celebrated. Mm-hmm. We need to talk to folks that might be forgotten, because today you have a different job. But again, if we have people that don't know how accomplished you were and everything that you have done, then we need to remind them. And maybe that's partly what helps people see we are a welcoming organization. We do want to be inclusive to all the people, not just people that a local bar association might classically attract.
Right. And here's one thing I would say is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of these things, right? There are Asian American, bar associations, other groups, Black bar associations, LGBTQIA bar associations that have been doing this work, that have been looking at this question. They already have all sorts of suggestions and recommendations. And I think making sure that these groups aren't just treated as like, oh, the diversity bar and kind of, put into this box on one side as being a real important part of the community. I think you have this untapped resource there, right? And then on top of that, right? I just wanted here's just throw out some ideas, right? So this month is API Heritage Month. Wouldn't it be great? And you see this in areas where, say, Asian Americans might comprise a larger percentage of the population. Wouldn't it be great if the bar was, sending out emails and things like that with important, landmark things about law for APIs, right? And to do so for all the different groups. So this month, right? How many people know United States v. Wong Kim Ark is the Supreme Court case that establishes birthright citizenship, right? How many people know about the famous case in San Francisco, the 13 lewd Chinese women or whatever? How many people know about the different laws that were passed that barred people from East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia from becoming U.S. citizens, from immigrating to the U.S., and what impact that had? And there's Korematsu, there's huge topics in law where Asian Americans played a huge part, played very foundational parts. And you don't learn a lot of that, even in law school. And it would be so easy, right, to start celebrating and highlighting the fact that, hey, major things and changes happened in American law because of Asian American litigants, because of Asian American attorneys, because of people who came out and fought, even in situations where that seemed insurmountable. I mean, Wong Kim Ark was at the height of the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, trying to argue that he, being born in the U.S., was a U.S. citizen. And that must have seemed impossible to the vast majority of people at the time. And he went to Supreme Court and he won. And he won 6-2, I believe. And so, it was, those are the kinds of things that it wouldn't take very much effort to highlight. And just doing that can make a young Asian American attorney opens the email from the Bar Association, sees their history celebrated, sees their contributions recognized, their community's contribution recognized. I can make a huge difference. It can totally change the way someone's feeling about their job, their profession, their career.
Well, lucky for us, this podcast will still air within AAPI month. So you have given some of that history lesson, and we will be taking notes for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I actually have been doing in my current position, I'm actually not, I'm using my legal training, but I'm not an attorney right now. I work for Austin City Council member. And one of the things I decided to do this month is, and I have to admit, I haven't done it every day, as I was trying to basically highlight an AAPI fact of the day for all the staff, the council staff, just as a part of kind of an education kind of thing. And so I was trying to do one every day. I haven't been able to do it every day, but I felt like that's a little thing that I can do. And a lot of times it's amazing what people don't realize they don't know, right? There's a sad statistic, right? Which is there's a big report they do on Asian Americans every year that this one organization does. And they look at some same questions every year. And one of the questions they looked at was, they just asked people, can you name one prominent Asian American? Just name somebody. 58% of Americans could not name a single person. The top 3 answers given by the remainder were Jackie Chan, and was it Jackie Chan was number 1, who's not American. Now Lucy Liu, I believe, was number 3. So, which she is American, she is Asian American in entertainment and media. Other answers people gave: Kim Jong-un was named as a prominent Asian American, and so. Clearly, even the most basic facts, about API history and heritage. And of course, I'm doing the same thing as a lot of Asian Americans do. I also frequently don't give enough weight to the PI part of that, right? Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders have a lot of rich history, their own history, and it can differ a lot from other Asian Americans. There's a history of sort of defined by colonialism, right? And obviously colonialism was an issue in Asia, but in terms of Native Hawaiians, for example, the complete annexation of their country, right? And that's a very different kind of background and experience than, say, I might have as the child of Taiwanese immigrants who came in the 70s. And so, again, sometimes the most basic details are missing, and just knowing a couple of them can absolutely change how somebody thinks of an entire group of people.
So you have been such a great guest, sharing so much information. What's next for you?
Well, right now I'm just really enjoying my current position. I am, after having been a practitioner for the last several years, I'm back in sort of policy world and getting paid for it actually, and helping to do policy for the city. And it's been great because, it's unlike DC, you get to see the results of your work much more immediately. And you feel like you're making a difference with real problems that people are facing every day. I have a great boss. Councilmember Vela is actually we were friends as attorneys and worked together before then. So I think we work together well now. And I plan to keep doing this as long as they'll have me. And once, who knows, how long I'll stay with the city, but I'm enjoying that. And then, of course, enjoying being a father. We just had my first child 10 months ago, and it's been an absolute blast. And just absolutely love him. And, thinking maybe of another.
Well, congratulations for all you do for the city, what you have done for Austin legal history. Is there anything else, any other piece of advice that you'd like to give our audience? Anything you'd like to share?
I probably shouldn't share this one too much, but I love this, and it was something I was taught very early. A lot of folks may know former state representative Glenn Maxey here in Austin. I count Glenn as one of my very early political mentors. And one of the very first things I learned from him, pretty much right after I met him for the first time, was if you ever find yourself saying somebody really oughta, that somebody is you.
That is wonderful advice. That somebody is you. Go get your Asian restaurant passport and support AACHI. And we'll see y'all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Everybody come out and tell your stories too.